Everyone knows that Homo sapiens are the kings and queens of Earth. But did you know that we almost certainly got our start in South Africa? Well, if you didn't know that, then prepare to be surprised because it turns out that there is plenty of evidence pointing to South Africa as the place where our species got its humble beginnings. In fact, we have reason to believe that modern humans arose from a population called the Homo heidelbergensis, which originated somewhere in Africa roughly 600,000 years ago. Now we know this because back in 1998, a fossil of a Homo heidelbergensis was unearthed in the country of Georgia. And after analyzing the skull, scientists came to the conclusion that this particular subspecies of human most likely gave rise to both us and the Neanderthals. But while that may be true, there's still a lot of questions surrounding exactly how and where this all went down. See, after the Homo habilis, which is an earlier species of human, started to migrate out of Africa about 500,000 years ago, they split into two different groups. One group moved into Europe and Western Asia, where they eventually evolved into the Neanderthals. Meanwhile, the other group remained in Africa and evolved into the Homo heidelbergensis. And while it was previously assumed that the Homo heidelbergensis were the ones who left Africa and eventually became the Neanderthals, the discovery of the Georgian fossil turned that theory on its head. So if we didn't come from the Homo heidelbergensis in Europe, then does that mean that we came from the ones in Africa? Well, yes, but with a twist. You see, up until recently, it was thought that the Homo heidelbergensis in Africa were pretty much the same as the ones in Europe. But new findings suggest that there may have actually been two distinct groups of heidelbergensis, one in Africa and one in Europe. This may explain why the African heidelbergensis didn't evolve into the Neanderthals, because they may not have been related at all. Of course, more research will need to be gathered before we can say for sure. But if this theory holds up, then the Neanderthals would have been more like a cousin species rather than a direct descendant. And what's really strange is that the Neanderthals actually predate modern humans by around 400,000 years. They first appeared in the fossil record around 450,000 years ago, and they lived in Europe and Western Asia until around 40,000 years ago when they went extinct. Meanwhile, the earliest evidence of Homo sapiens comes from around 300,000 years ago in Ethiopia. But why did we evolve so much later, especially considering that our ancestors had been in Africa since at least 600,000 years ago? Well, some scientists believe that there may have been a population bottleneck that wiped out a large percentage of the Homo heidelbergensis in Africa, leaving only a few hundred individuals alive. If that's true, then those few hundred would have been the ones who eventually became us. But that's not the only theory out there. Another idea is that the transition from Homo heidelbergensis to Homo sapiens may have been a gradual process that only occurred in a small part of Africa. And it's possible that these small pockets of early Homo sapiens would have looked very similar to the heidelbergensis, so they could have easily gone unnoticed until recently. The truth is we don't know for sure, but researchers are hopeful that by continuing to study the fossils found in South Africa, they'll be able to paint a clearer picture of exactly how and why we evolved. One thing's for certain, though. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for our ancestors in Africa. So maybe one day, we'll have to thank them for giving us life. Now that you know where we came from, find out what you have in common with chimps or watch this video instead.